Welcome to episode 198 of Soccer Works, where we take a look at how soccer works in the U.S. and around the world.
3, 2, 1.
Welcome to this Soccer Works Roundtable series, live at the bar of the U.S. Soccer AGM. This is part one with Chris Kessell and Miki Turner. All right, so I've got Chris Kessell from West Virginia and Miki Turner all the way from Seattle joining us.
Good
with
evening.
The Athletic. Say hey, Chris.
Thank you for having me.
So we are literally having Soccer Works, a roundtable edition at the bar of the U.S. Soccer AGM Hotel. And we are just going to talk about whatever comes to mind. So buckle up and enjoy the ride. So look, I'm gonna come in and state the obvious from the top. There are a lot of eyeballs on us sitting over here at this table, having a chat, wondering what in the heck are these guys doing. So I just want to ask, Chris, first for you, what has been kind of your big takeaway from today?
You know, I think the takeaway from today is that there are a lot of people here who are angry at how things run, and they feel powerless, and they feel like things are never going to change, and they're really upset about how soccer is being governed in the country right now. And then there's another subset of people who are perfectly happy with how everything's running.
So do you think the number of people that are upset, are they equal to the people that are happy with how things are? Are there more of those people who are upset? What do you think?
I think that there are more people who are willing to come out and just blatantly say that they're upset this year than there was last year.
Really?
I think that last year a lot of people were being very political about it, and they were kind of keeping everything close to their chest. And this year it's a lot easier to get people in casual conversation to say, hey, this sucks.
Wow. Miki, what have you seen? You've been in and out of a lot of meetings today. I know you were covering the Athlete Council at one point today. What have been like your big observance from today's AGM?
So this is my first AGM that I've gone to. Obviously, I wish I would have gone to the soccer election last year. And so that's kind of where my opinion, I guess, is informed, at least at the start, based on the chaos that was going on last year. It's not been nearly the same this year. And so I've learned a lot about, how governance is run in U.S. soccer, and it's definitely, my thought is that it's definitely run top down.
Okay.
It seems to be, and you guys can tell me a little bit about how it was last year or in years past, but it seems to be a lot of Carlos Cadero or whoever the president is, and those higher ups basically making their way from one council meeting to another, going over whatever they need to do to answer questions from the council members, and then that's pretty much it. So they'll come in, they'll make a little presentation, answer questions, and then they kind of take off, head back up to Valhalla, where they tend to reside as the higher ups. And I don't know if that matches up with what's been in the past. I wouldn't be surprised, because that seems to be the way that the Federation works these days. And so on the heels of the U.S. men's national team missing the World Cup, that was obviously kind of the overriding issue.
Sure.
That kind of informed the elections last year, with that kind of in the past, and now you've got Ernie Stewart in for the men. I don't know if you were in the Athletes Council when they were going over this, because I know you showed up a little later, but they talked a little bit about the women's national team and getting a general manager in place for the ladies on that side. So that was at least some news that came out of it, without having an election to kind of run back and forth and talk to sources and do lots of reporting, without that kind of thing that's just hovering over the whole general meeting. I was just kind of looking for interesting stories and interesting news bites that were coming out of the thing. So from that perspective, it was informative, but I don't know if my opinion changed about what I thought the Federation was doing prior to this event or in years past. It seems about the same, and which kind of leads into what Chris was just talking about. It's about people being fed up with how things are run. And so that's kind of that's my kind of general impression about the event as a whole.
Right. So both of you guys, like Chris, I know last year was your first AGM, and Miki, this is your first AGM this year. Do you, being at this event, right, and I'll go with you, Chris, being at this event, for you now your second year in a row, do you feel like coming here, things are getting done? Is it action-oriented? Is it a lot of, whining and complaining? Or, do you see positive, solutions that are going, okay, hey, here's what we can do, here's how we can work together? Like, when you have a meeting, right? So let's say it's a USASA Region 1 meeting, because you're in West Virginia, so you're Region 1. Like, those kind of meetings, are they functional? Are they helpful? What's your impression of that?
They are not very functional.
Okay.
There is quite a bit of dysfunction within the smaller meeting groups. There are a lot of problems that probably should be mediated during outside conversations before we come to a meeting like this. Like, it's a lot of the issues that exist between the organizations need to be like literally mediated. Like, everybody knows there's XYZ problem, that exists between certain, organizations or about a certain issue or whatever. And it just seems to me that there isn't the level of communication that there needs to be. So everybody sort of waits for this meeting or one of the other national meetings, and then they have these big conversations, and that's not enough time. An hour or a 30-minute conversation, that isn't enough time to work out all of this stuff. Like, just go ahead, have a conversation, include all the necessary parties, and let's communicate and try to work through the issues. And we are all involved in the governance of the game in this country at whatever level we're at. So include all the other stakeholders in this problem, whatever it is. I mean, obviously there's a multitude of problems people are trying to talk about.
Sure.
Include all the stakeholders, go up a level, go down a level, bring in other people that maybe have solved the problem similar to this somewhere else in the country. There's a lot of smart people here. Like, that's one of the things. There's a lot of really smart people here that actually really, really care about the game and could help a lot of solutions for local problems, local governance issues, but we're not bringing the power of the mass of people that are here to bear on all of these problems.
Right.
All three of us were sitting at a table with some very smart gentlemen earlier, and, they went over decades of history about how we got here. And, obviously they didn't have all the answers, but I mean, just talking through how we got here helped everybody at the table kind of go, okay, well, now that we know how we got here, it's easier to kind of see, well, maybe if we make a different decision now to go this other direction, we can help change a little something going forward. But if we don't bring all this knowledge and stuff to the table, it ends up just being dysfunctional mess.
Right. Completely. Miki, what are your thoughts?
Well, I guess my question would be, kind of along the lines of what Chris said. What are they bringing to the table at these meetings that's getting things moving forward? Are they making these decisions at a high level and then just dropping them down like 2 commandments on the various, council meetings or stakeholders, or are they getting those people involved 6 weeks, 2 months, 6 months in advance? And by that time, there's been enough collaboration and a consensus that's reached where this kind of thing is more or less a formality. So
Right.
should you be really arguing about all of this stuff at the AGM, or should it have already been vetted for the last, 2, 3, 6 months, and it's more or less a formality? One of the examples, it sounds like it actually worked, was there were some changes that needed to be made to the U.S. Open Cup as far as teams getting, how teams are designated, how a new team comes in, a team that's just created, what
Right.
level they come in at.
Right.
It sounds like on that level, they dealt with these things at least 3 or 4 weeks, months in advance. And so when they came in and had a vote, there wasn't any issues because everyone had already hashed out the problem. And so you get a unanimous vote because everyone knows where everyone's coming from. So are they doing those things when it comes to youth development, the adult leagues, and anything else? Or are they kind of trying to hash these things out the day
Right.
before the meeting, and then you come in and you got 30 people asking questions, and then you don't get anywhere because you haven't really gone through the steps that you need to go through. So that's an interesting point. And again, this being my first one, I can't speak to how it's been run in the past, but it'll be interesting to see if they're able to kind of move these issues earlier in the process so that there's a consensus reached earlier, and then you're not having these types of problems where people aren't informed about what's going on, or you get stuff dropped on you, the day before the meeting, or 5 minutes before the meeting, or during the meeting.
Or during the meeting.
Yeah,
Right.
And you're like, what the hell? I had no chance to review this amendment that you want to make, or submit to the bylaws, or take something out, and then all hell breaks loose when
Right.
someone's toes get stepped on.
So one of the things that I have noticed in last year's AGM, and which was completely different than this year's AGM. Last year's AGM, for anyone listening who doesn't know, I ran Eric Winalda's campaign for president of U.S. Soccer, and it was a different beast altogether. The AGM, there was so much focus, hype, attention on the election.
It was incredible. It was incredible.
8 candidates, many of which had campaign staffs. I know we had a staff that was on site. We also had staff that were off site, remote, that we were in constant contact with, that were part of the team. Like that was all about the election. I mean, everything else was secondary. All eyes were on the election. Every conversation was about the election. You were running one meeting to another, worrying about who's going to get elected, who's not going to get elected, who's going to win.
Vote counts,
right? All of these things.
Whipping up stuff. Yeah.
Whereas this year's AGM has been much more like casual. It's been John Mata. Come on, say hey. Come say hey. Just speak into the microphone right here.
I don't.
Just say hey. All you gotta do is say hey.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening, everyone.
How you doing?
How's it going, John?
Good.
You enjoying yourself?
Always.
Always?
If I didn't have fun, I wouldn't be here.
So, for everyone listening, John Mata is the president of U.S. Adult Soccer, and you just won re-election.
Well, as a adult commissioner.
Today, but I mean, as president, right? Back in the fall.
President was in September. Got re-elected.
And is that a 4-year term?
2.
2-year term. So every 2 years you have to run? So everybody who's out in the audience or who's listening, who's in adult soccer, vote for John any chance you get. He's one of the best ever. And
that's how you get to become
I
the
love.
Problem is these guys don't vote. Everybody votes here.
Look, you never know. In a year or
That's
two,
true.
they might
It
be in
could
it, right? And we need more people involved, right? We need
agree.
more people, right?
Agree.
So if you get involved, vote for John. He's a great guy, right? I'm going to go on and do his campaign ad right
Be my
now.
campaign manager.
That's right. That's right. Keep up the great work, John.
Thank you.
Thank you for stopping by.
Yeah.
So that was John Mata, guys. He is the president of U.S. Adult Soccer, and we're glad that he said hey. And so back to the conversation. Like last year was completely different. This year seems more relaxed.
Yeah.
More chill.
Even not having been there last year, the vibe was just completely different.
Completely different, right? And in that relaxation, I think, Chris, something you mentioned a couple minutes ago is that I think that relaxation has allowed people to relax to the point that they're just kind of like speaking their mind. Like, I've had so many people come up to me. You know, I walked into the hotel last night and had several people like on the way in, like, what are you doing here? Like, talking to people. They were saying, hey, just asking questions. And then the more that I've interacted with voters, delegates, people with the state associations, etc., who have said, like, man, I wish this was different, or I wish this was changed, or I wish this. And so I have definitely sensed that relaxed feeling kind of give people a sense of freedom to kind of speak up and, and really kind of share, hey, this is what I'd like to see, or, I would like to see this improved, or, whatever. I saw a few different meetings today. One that I stepped in on was the Athlete Council, Miki, with you. Oh, we got Mr. Chris Heights. Chris, say hey. Right here to this microphone. Say hey.
Who am I saying hey to?
To the podcast audience. Just say
Hello.
hey.
Is there a podcast audience?
There is a podcast audience.
Beyond the four people sitting here?
My mother, my grandmothers, God rest their souls, that they're gone. But my mother and my wife and my mother-in-law. There's at least 3 people
right
in
now?
this world that will listen.
Hello, the 3 ladies of Daniel's life.
Thank you. Thank you.
I wish I could say you're very lucky, but instead I will commiserate with you.
Yes, Chris is the best when it comes to Debbie Downer over here. Yeah. He's Chris Debbie Downer Heights. Right? Thanks for stopping in, Chris.
See you guys.
So, like, the AGM to me has a different feel this year than last year, right? And that feeling this year, there's part of it to me where there's this kind of feeling of resignation, like, this is just kind of what we're stuck with. But then there's another part where I sense a lot of people are like, you know what? I don't like the way things are, and I'm not going to remain silent anymore. I'm just going to start talking. I'm going to start sharing. I'm going to start reaching out. And Chris, there was one thing that I think would be helpful going forward that I hope a lot of people like yourself who are involved in state associations, maybe there's somebody listening who's thinking about getting involved with state associations or an organization that can affect change, and that is this idea of creating a caucus, right? So share a little bit about kind of what your thoughts are on creating a reform-minded, growth-minded caucus for U.S. soccer.
So a lot of the conversations that I've had today, I've broached the subject with people, and it's basically we believe in American soccer. We believe in its potential. We believe that if change is made, we can reach the potential that American soccer has, which we aren't reaching right now.
And what do you think that is? What do you think the potential of American soccer is?
I mean, I think that America can be one of the top nations in the world for men's soccer, and women's soccer can be so amazing that we will be untouchable.
Right.
Whereas we're we're the best or one of the best, we're at the top, but we can be so great at women's soccer that like everybody else is playing for second all the time.
Sure.
And I really think that we can be there. I mean,
right.
We have the sporting culture, we have, the infrastructure, the money, to get there. And people love the game. I mean, we have millions of players and millions of youth that play, and big cities and stadiums. I mean, we have everything except for proper governance. And so one of the ideas is to have a caucus, and it's basically to get like-minded people that are involved with governance of soccer in this country, no matter the level you're on, whether you are a delegate, a voter here at the AGM, or if you are at the state level and you can affect change in your state, to stay in contact with each other, to share information, to work together to affect broadly effective change. Like, if we go, okay, so this is what we're going to do. We see this issue. How are you all handling it in your state, so that we can work to implement something that worked there other places? So we can not only work to fix these giant problems that I think everybody sees, but also these small problems that if we don't communicate about them, nobody knows how to fix them. Everybody's trying to come up with their own solution, which is just reinventing the wheel. Like, if since Miki's living in Seattle, if Washington has already solved a problem that we're having in West Virginia, why do I have to rack my brain for 6 months and try this and try that, and maybe it didn't work, and next year we try something else, when all I had to do was talk to Miki and go, man, that is a great idea. We're going to do that, and it'll probably work. Right. Because as different as all of these communities are, I mean, a lot of the problems are the same, and if you can look at how other communities that are maybe similar to yours, or maybe even not similar to yours, and see how problems are getting, worked through, it'll be better for everybody. And that's sort of the idea about having like-minded, reform-minded people all communicating with each other, and staying in constant contact with each other, getting together. And then that way, when we come back to the AGM next year, we all have a plan. We all know what we want to do. Maybe we've worked together to come up with a bylaw or a policy change that we think can work. There's a policy, there's a bylaw change up for vote tomorrow, that Dr. Tom Moore from Cal North has put forth. That is, it's a good thing, and as we all heard, it's not as far-reaching as the original version. Unfortunately, that he and a bunch of other people, I gave my input during the creation of it, along with a bunch of other people. It's not as far-reaching as that, but a first step is a first step, and we don't get anywhere without taking a first step.
Absolutely. I mean, look, you're not going to solve every problem overnight. As much as we would love to kind of snap our fingers, wave a magic wand, and think, everything, it can be fixed, in a month's time or 6 months' time. It's not reality. U.S. Soccer as a federation, as an organization, is so dysfunctional, and I'm not trying to say that in a way that is trying to be derogatory. I'm just saying, if you look at it, if you were an organizational leader, expert, that comes in, a coach who kind of talks to organizations about how to run effective organizations, lead effective teams. If you were a leadership person, and you were to analyze the U.S. Soccer Federation, you would find so many areas where there are just massive dysfunctions, like leadership dysfunctions in terms of personnel, but also just systemic and structural dysfunctions, where lack of transparency, lack of bidding policy, open bidding, just good governance issues, conflicts of interest, and the policies that surround conflicts of interest. And Miki, I know with your background, I know you've been talking about a lot of these different aspects and elements. You've covered a lot with the NASL case and some other stuff.
Yeah.
Kind of as you've been covering those different things, what have you seen in the areas of governance? Has anything kind of been alarming, disturbing, surprising? Kind of what are your thoughts?
All right, so I'd say the most, I don't know if I would call it disturbing or surprising, but it may be a combination of both. Surprising is probably in the area of the training compensation solidarity payments.
Okay.
Generally, just because I think it's not even whether you agree with the principle of it or not. It's more that whatever your thoughts are on the process, that U.S. Soccer wasn't really following what the rules were just on a basic level. And by way of example, every player that goes through the Youth Development Academy or plays, youth soccer is supposed to have what's called a player passport, which basically outlines your name, date of birth, when you played for X Academy, and if you moved on from X Academy to Y Academy, the dates you did that. U.S. Soccer didn't even have that basic information.
Right.
And so it basically, the case I'm obviously referring to is the DeAndre Yedlin Crossfire case, where Crossfire is trying to get solidarity payments. One of the defenses that Tottenham raised in that lawsuit was basically U.S. Soccer's record keeping was so poor. We have, them being Tottenham, we have no way of determining how much you would be eligible for in those payments in the event we agreed you were owed them at all. So just their record keeping was just not good enough to comply with the FIFA standards. And you just, again, you have to wonder what they were doing for the past 10 years. When they knew this stuff was coming down the pike. And so in the Athletes Council meeting today, they went over that pretty in depth about how they've made some changes to that. Now they're trying to get all the players that play soccer in the United States for youth academies or what have you, get them what are called FIFA ID cards, so their basic information, that you know their names, when they're playing for teams, their date of birth, and so and that has other implications too, as far as making sure that kids are being trafficked across state lines, and they're just disappearing without a trace because you don't know how to track where they've gone. So that kind of stuff is just stuff they should have been doing, since they were U.S. Soccer was incorporated or started. But at least they're getting on that path now. But it's way late.
Well, the point you're making right there is kind of what I'm talking about the dysfunction, right? So dysfunction doesn't just mean like pure chaos or organizational mess from a standpoint of intentionally trying to screw things up. But dysfunction also looks at like just lack of doing the ABCs. You know what I'm saying? Dotting I's, crossing T's, the base level, responsibility of a federation.
And that's why they got into that mess, because they weren't doing that stuff. You're not checking the date of birth of somebody, and now you've come to the point where now you've got a Premier League team, messing up with somebody's, ability to get paid for developing players. And now, and then one of the other things that's a result of that is if they were to win that case, U.S. Soccer could be in a world of hurt because they're in non-compliance with FIFA, and maybe Crossfire goes to the U.S. Olympic Committee and basically says, you should pull their sanctioning, because, or FIFA for that matter, and says, because you are so dysfunctional, because you were not doing what you needed to do on just a systemic level, why are you in charge of professional or amateur soccer? Why are you a thing at this point anyway? Because you've proven that you aren't able to do what your charter and your bylaws, what your remit is. And so all because they weren't paying attention to these things, all because you couldn't be bothered to get somebody's player passport right. Now you're in a situation where your charter's at risk. Now, whether that's actually the case is another issue, but just as an example, that's how a little snowflake turns into a snowball.
Sure. So when you're looking at U.S. soccer, right? So you've got their responsibilities to FIFA, which is the international governing body of soccer, and then you have their responsibilities to the country, to the members domestically, right? And part of that responsibility you alluded to was to the U.S. Olympic Committee, because U.S. soccer operates the Olympic program, right? So they almost in a way serve two masters, right? You've got their main master of FIFA, but then domestically they also have to kind of stay in the good graces of the U.S. Olympic Committee, or the USOC is what they're often referred to. So when you look at U.S. soccer and those responsibilities, when it comes to FIFA, there's not a lot that they have to do, right?
No, not really.
There's not a lot. So what
FIFA leaves them alone anyway, for the most part.
Generally leaves them alone. But like the few responsibilities they have is, making sure, that they're operating their national teams in a FIFA compliant way, so that their players are legal, and if they're participating in tournaments or whatever, rosters, administration stuff, right? And then you have their responsibilities to FIFA administration-wise with what you alluded to, which is the player piece of tracking the player passport and all of that. Totally asleep at the wheel, right?
Yeah.
I mean, just
for the last 10 years. I guess
forever.
Yeah,
we've never done it.
Yeah.
It's not 10 years. We've never done any kind of admin work on that level, unless it was a player that was going to go overseas, and then we were going to handle that one guy's case, right? Mm-hmm. So like, before there was Yedlin, let's say it was Dempsey.
That's the other case.
So we're going to get Dempsey overseas. What do we got to do to get Dempsey overseas? Let's fill out this paperwork. Boom, it's done. We're going to ignore the other millions of players, right? We're just going to handle that one guy because he's going over to Fulham, right? And now we see this with the younger players that are in Germany, and Pulisic and Sargent and McKinney and Adams. Timothy Weah, all of these guys that are overseas, where obviously their passports are handled and all of that kind of things, but all of these other players that may not be marquee names are in the past have been just ignored, right?
Yeah. And it's the crazy thing. Well, it's not crazy. It makes sense. It's somewhat cynical, but it makes sense, is now that MLS teams, just to use MLS as the example because they're the top domestic league,
sure,
they're the ones that are putting the money into their youth academies at this point, their reserve teams. So now you're starting to see a bunch of players come up and, hey, we can sell this guy for $3 million, $13 million, $30 million, or even $500,000.
Right.
And so now you've got to have those ducks in a row. And so now MLS sees it as they need to, and U.S. Soccer by extension, they need to get those player passports or FIFA IDs, whatever they're calling it these days. But they didn't care about that stuff 10 years ago when the academy system was just starting to get developed, because they weren't developing players to go overseas. And it was not worth the hassle of registering properly 2 million players to just deal with the 4 that are going overseas now.
Right.
And so now it's not only is it more than 4, it's for more than, a couple $1 million. Now you're talking about Pulisic, who goes and gets sold for $73 million and now has, his old academy youth development team looking at a potential check for $700,000 or $800,000.
Right.
And once you multiply that by 5, 6, 7 players, even if it's not $73 million, if it's $7 million, that's still a good chunk of change.
It's adding up.
Yeah.
And ultimately, that looks at the kind of the third piece of what U.S. Soccer has as a responsibility to FIFA, which is to be a member in good standing, which is, in other words, FIFA compliance is a phrase I use a lot, just meaning that you're going to be a federation of FIFA. That means that you're going to comply with all of the rules of FIFA, unless you have a domestic law that intervenes, right? Because FIFA does not have the legal ability to come into the United States government and say, no, you can't pass that law. You have to do right. You can't.
The U.S. government's going to tell them to go jump off a cliff.
And to be fair, every country in the world is going to do that, right? So FIFA doesn't have that. So there is a stipulation that basically says, and I used this example earlier today, if the U.S. government, if Congress passed a law that said that you could not be a professional soccer player until you turned 21, then FIFA could not come in and say, well, we don't care, you can sign 17-year-olds to pro contracts. They wouldn't be able to change it. U.S. law would say only 21 years old and above, and that's what
assuming
they'd have to
that, obviously assuming that kind of law passed constitutional scrutiny.
Correct.
For the sake of argument,
this is just hypothetical.
Assuming that
example.
was legal, and the Supreme Court said, nobody under 21 could sign a pro contract.
Right.
FIFA would have no recourse.
They would just have to honor it.
Yeah, they would just. Their option is basically to lobby Congress to change
Correct.
the law at that point, and that's all they could do.
Sure. So in that scenario, right, that's the only out or exemption from FIFA compliance that U.S. Soccer is granted, U.S. law. So in U.S. Soccer's bylaws, this kind of third piece of U.S. Soccer's responsibility as a member of FIFA, right, the responsibility of the federation to be a FIFA compliant member, and yet we don't have solidarity payments. We don't have training compensation. We don't have, promotion and relegation, or the principle of sporting merit as FIFA, has set forth in their bylaws and policies, of which U.S. Soccer is a member. There is no U.S. law that prohibits FIFA compliance in these areas. There has been, Miki, you've alluded to.
Yeah, we argued a little bit about this off air, yeah.
Right, about the idea that U.S. Soccer might make the claim that, well, there's a threat of a lawsuit. Mm-hmm. But that's not what the bylaw says. The bylaw doesn't say there's a threat of legal action. It says unless U.S. law intervenes. So in the absence of a standing law, which there is no standing law, I think all three of us can agree that there is no standing law that prohibits promotion and relegation, because it exists in U.S. Soccer, inside of leagues around the country, whether it's youth leagues or some adult amateur leagues. Like, there's some there. The federation has not created promotion and relegation as a national system. And then there's also this absence of solidarity payments and training compensation, not been enacted, haven't been doing the paperwork, etc. So this third responsibility of the federation to FIFA is not being handled. So Chris, you're in West Virginia. You've got league. You've got clubs. You've got players. You've got coaches. You've got all these things. What would FIFA compliance mean to your club, your local community club, if Christian Pulisic didn't come from PA Classics, but came from your club, and you were standing to gain $700,000 to $800,000 in payments? What would that mean to your ability to operate your club next year? What would that do?
If somebody a factor of 15,000% of the budget that we do yearly, I think that would help just a tad. No, look. The thing is if communities, I say this all the time, like, if communities are allowed to hope and if they're allowed to believe, they're going to buy in. Like, you know, a lot of people that live in larger cities, I don't think that they really kind of get why, like, high school sports are so big in these medium and small sized towns. Like, I mean, I personally went to high school basketball games that there were 13,000 people at because two guys from rival high schools were both going to go be big-time Division I basketball players.
Right.
And football, the same way, 10,000. I mean, we've all seen Texas high school football.
Yeah.
You know, so let's transpose that deep
So real quick,
meaning.
I want to stop you real quick.
Go ahead.
Just a funny aside. You brought up Texas high school football, right?
Yeah.
10, 15, 20,000 fans. The U.S. national team played in Phoenix a month ago for 7,000 fans.
Yeah.
7,000 fans.
7,000 fans. Right.
Crazy.
Yeah. And, you know, if you allow these communities to participate in something that they're actually able to believe in and hope and invest in and say, this is a clear-cut pathway. Like every other sport in the United States, like you're allowed to see the clear-cut pathway to the top. Like I gave this story. I think I've told it to you before. I've wrote about it. You know, I didn't know anything about football. My best friend was a Division II All-American running back, and he asked me to come coach football with me. He was like, "You're great with kids. When I yell at them, you tell them they're going great. Good cop, bad cop." I was like, you know what, Mike, I can handle that. Right. You know what I mean?
Right.
And we were on the west side of Charleston. We drew kids from 3 large housing projects in the poorest community in the poorest country in the state. The poorest state in the country. And after coaching for a few years, the kids started, you know, going through high school. They won a state championship. A bunch of these boys got to play in college. And there was a clear development pathway that the kids and their families and the community could see and believe in. You played 11 and 12-year-old Major League Football, then you went to the middle school, then you went to the high school, then you went to college, and if you were good enough and you worked hard enough, you could be in the NFL. At that time, right after that, I was coaching in a different neighborhood, soccer, and it was a lot of really, really, really wealthy, you know, girls. And after a couple years, I was like, so how exactly, I'm trying to wrap my head around, how do you get from here to the top? There is no pathway. There's nothing for the parents to believe in. There's nothing for the kids to believe in. There's nothing for the community to believe in. So it's just disjointed, jumbledy mess. So the irony wasn't lost on me that poor kids that play other sports have a way to the top that everybody can see and they can invest in as people, and people can invest in them. That's the reason why you see coaches in basketball and baseball and football and all these other sports dedicate so much time, because they know that if they invest their time, the kids can be rewarded for it. There is no reward. If I donate 5,000 hours working with these 20, 30 girls, and they all become amazing players, and then, okay, now what's next? There is nothing next. I could be sitting on, 3 Mia Hams and 2 Julie Foudies, and like nobody would ever know.
Right.
So if U.S. soccer wasn't this jumbled mess and merit mattered, everybody would be able to invest in their community, their kids, the players, the coaches, the referees, and everything, and people would believe in the game, and they could see their pathway to the top. I mean, like, I think it's as simple as that. Like, currently, there's no reason for the average American soccer parent of a 10-year-old kid to believe. Like, what are you believing in?
Right.
Oh, one day we can drive 4 hours to go to DA practice. Like, I mean, is that what we're believing in?
Right.
Like, like that's what we're trying to sell people right now. Is that's the dream. And that's not a dream to me. That's a hassle. As a soccer parent, that's a hassle.
I agree.
I would say, just I guess briefly to follow
Jump in,
up
Miki.
on just kind of the pathway, and it kind of explains the lack of enthusiasm. Daniel, you talked about the attendance for the national team games, which is for friendlies, I should say, which has been absolutely awful. And it's been awful actually for about 4 years, excluding either high-profile friendlies or qualifying. They haven't, they barely draw over 10,000 for those games anyway. And I think that just kind of speaks to the malaise that the soccer,
what is
U.S. soccer
what is
world
causing
is in.
the malaise?
I mean, again, because this goes prior to the U.S. failing to qualify for the World Cup. So we're talking like 2015, 2015 or so, when they were drawing those terrible crowds. It's a good question because, coming off the 2014 World Cup, there should be no reason for that because they came off a round of 16 appearance. There was a lot of there was a lot of buzz. Tim Howard, standing on his head against Belgium. And then, going in, 2017 when they were, I guess the Gold Cup was going on. But in any case, there was not anything really overly interesting. And as a result, the attendance just plummeted. I suppose it was understandable coming off of failing to, qualify for the World Cup.
Sure.
And then, obviously, the U.S. soccer elections, I think had something to do with just the kind of lack of enthusiasm, especially from the grassroots, many of whom wanted to see major change. And when that happened, I'm sure that had something to do with the fact that there was just a lack of interest. And so it's an excellent question. I mean, the other issue is obviously, putting a game in Phoenix in that massive stadium, coming off that was just a terrible idea in the first place. Why are you going to a 60,000 seat stadium for a friendly against a non-Mexico, Brazil, Argentina team? I mean, I get, those are just kind of decisions that U.S. Soccer, the Federation, should be able to see from a mile down the road.
Right. That
you're never going to sell more than 15,000 people on a Panama, USA, January cupcake C team lineup. I mean,
sure.
Those are just, you would think those are just kind of common sense things.
The tickets were like a fortune.
Yeah, and then the other thing, obviously the ticket prices. Ticket prices were insane. And so a lot of this just seems to be common sense to me. And then, the one thing about that is, so Neil Galati, who's an economist, famously, talked about some of the things. Would you rather sell 40,000 seats, 40,000 tickets at $20 a pop, or 20,000 at $40 a pop? Obviously, you would, his theory was, of course, we'd rather sell 40,000 at 20, but his theory was basically, if you cut the price in half, you're not going to get twice the amount of people, but maybe you should, take that hit and just make it more accessible. And so those are all kind of issues that the Federation has been dealing with, again, for a long time, even before the 2018 failure.
Sure. So if we look at some of that, right? So let's park there for just a second. It's real easy to get caught up in identifying problems.
Yeah.
Any middle manager or employee can tell you how screwed up your company is. They can tell
Captain
you.
Hindsight.
Right?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Exactly. So I want to, instead of being, just critical, negative, or overly critical and negative, I want to just park here for a second and look at solutions. So, for example, if you're looking at the national team, what are some things that you think would improve attendance, improve excitement, improve engagement with communities, with fans, supporters? What do you think are some things that you mentioned the ticket prices.
I think that's
What's
a good
something
place.
else you could do?
That's a good place to start. Just generally speaking,
Okay.
is reduce the prices and take a little bit of a hit on the on your revenue. The Sounders, for example, just announced that they're selling $10 tickets to college students.
Okay.
And that's a great way to get younger people in. You get them, you reel them in, you hook them, and then once they graduate from college and they've got disposable income,
Sure.
they're going to become most likely season ticket holders. So that's that's obviously just a basic thing they could do, and the Federation could certainly do that because what is the point of renting out a 70,000 seat stadium and putting only 10,000 people in there?
Right. Or in the case of Phoenix, it was 7,000.
I'm overshooting
I don't want to give it 3,000 extra fans because it was bad.
Yeah, it was awful.
It was really bad.
Yeah, and so again, I understand their position that as an Sunil's an economist, and so I'm sure he understands that much more than I do. But it's just kind of common sense. So some of those things, and then just kind of more community engagement. Certainly getting into the rural, low-income communities, giving some tickets away, getting people out there, because those are the types of fans that you can develop over time. And then obviously some of that stuff also has to do with getting those kids involved in soccer at a younger age and keeping them there. And I know that was a lot of discussion. I'm sure it was throughout today's meetings, is the fact that U.S. Soccer is losing kids around 10 years old, and they're not they're either going to other sports, although that's not necessarily the case either, but they're just not interested in soccer at that point, and they're playing Fortnite on a nightly basis. And so some of the things that they need to do there as far as making it more accessible. We talked about developing more futsal courts and things like that. Use some of that $150 million surplus to get into communities and start doing issuing more grants. So there's a lot of stuff they can do there. And I know the U.S. Soccer Foundation. That's obviously another issue, another lawsuit that they're currently dealing with. But I'm hearing that that's going to get actually settled relatively soon. It sounds like they're doing well as far as negotiations, but not fighting with your members or your allies would be an excellent step and get out from under the 13 lawsuits that they're currently involved in. It's not 13, but
it
it's
feels
more
like
than 5. It's more than 5.
It feels like it. Thanks for listening to this SoccerWorks Roundtable series live at the bar of the U.S. Soccer AGM. This has been part 1 of a conversation with Chris Kessell and Miki Turner. I'd like to thank Chris and Miki for joining the show. You can learn more about SoccerWorks by visiting wrk.mn/SoccerWorks. Until next time.